Today, we take a look at 6 of the worst revenge deaths ever recorded. From a farmhand led to a trap by a jealous cousin, to an exposed officer abusing his power against an activist, which escalated in the most brutal way possible. It was July 14th, 2016. The evening heat in Phoenix, Arizona lingered well after sunset, the kind that pressed down on the city and made breathing feel heavier than normal. In a modest apartment complex on the city's west side, Carmen Torres, a 45-year-old administrative assistant, returned home after a double shift at a medical billing office. Carmen lived alone. Her days were structured and predictable: work, errands, paperwork, sleep. She was known among coworkers for being methodical and uncomplaining, someone who followed procedures because she believed systems only worked if people used them correctly. That mindset had recently pulled her into a conflict she hadn't anticipated. 3 weeks earlier, Carmen had filed a formal complaint with the city after repeated issues with emergency response times in her neighborhood. On 2 separate occasions, she had called 911 for unrelated incidents and waited more than 40 minutes for help. After the second delay, she requested a case review, submitting call timestamps and recordings obtained through a public records request. The complaint referenced operator 412, the dispatcher assigned to both calls, identified only by an operator ID number listed in the records. Monica Reynolds, 42, worked the overnight shift at the Regional Emergency Communications Center. She had been a dispatcher for nearly 9 years and was known internally for her rigid control of calls and tendency to dismiss what she considered non-critical reports. Supervisors had previously counseled her for tone and judgment issues, but staffing shortages kept her on active duty. When Monica learned of the complaint, she took it personally. According to later testimony, she viewed Carmen as a civilian, attempting to interfere with a job she didn't understand. The review threatened disciplinary action and possible reassignment. Consequences Monica blamed entirely on Carmen. On the night of July 14th, Carmen began experiencing sudden chest tightness and difficulty breathing while preparing dinner. She attempted to sit down, but dizziness forced her to the floor. At 9:18 p.m., she called 911. The call connected to Monica's console. Audio recordings later confirmed Carmen's voice was strained but coherent. She reported shortness of breath, radiating chest pain, and numbness in her left arm, symptoms that normally trigger an automatic Priority 1 medical response in the computer-aided dispatch system. Investigators later determined that operator 412 manually entered the call as nervous caller or anxiety-related, bypassing automatic ambulance dispatch and preventing units from being assigned. She asked prolonged follow-up questions unrelated to immediate dispatch, including whether Carmen had a prior anxiety diagnosis or had taken medication, then placed the call on hold for more than 2 minutes as Carmen struggled to respond. Dispatch logs showed no ambulance was assigned during that window. At 9:27 p.m., Carmen's breathing became erratic. Her responses slowed. The call recording captured a faint thud, followed by silence. Despite mandatory protocol requiring an immediate welfare check when a caller becomes unresponsive, operator 412 marked the call as caller disconnected and closed it without dispatching police or medical units. No units were sent. At 10:04 p.m., a neighbor heard a smoke alarm sounding continuously and called emergency services. A different dispatcher sent fire and medical units immediately. Responders forced entry into Carmen's apartment and found her unresponsive on the kitchen floor. Paramedics attempted resuscitation for 21 minutes. Carmen was pronounced dead at the scene. The medical examiner later determined the cause of death was an acute myocardial infarction. Investigators noted that timely intervention would have significantly increased her chances of survival. The death initially appeared natural, until Carmen's family requested her 911 call records. An internal review traced operator 412's console activity and CAD entries to Monica Reynolds, confirming she handled the call, falsified its priority classification, delayed dispatch, and closed it in violation of mandatory protocol. Investigators also uncovered the unresolved complaint Carmen had filed weeks earlier. Prosecutors argued the actions were retaliatory, not negligent. Monica Reynolds was arrested and charged with second-degree murder and abuse of public trust, citing deliberate record falsification and failure to initiate a welfare check following internal review and grand jury consideration. She was convicted and sentenced to a lengthy prison term. It was October 17, 2015. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across a family-operated grain farm outside Moose Jaw, Saskatchewan, Canada. Derek Lavoie, a 29-year-old farmhand, approached the 40-foot steel grain silo with a wrench and his work gloves. Derek had worked on his uncle's farm since graduating high school, choosing agricultural labor over college. He was reliable and known for staying late to handle equipment repairs that others avoided. Unmarried and living in a small rental house near the property, he spent most evenings maintaining machinery or helping his cousin Gareth with field work. His hands were calloused from years of manual labor, and his friends said he took pride in being the go-to person for difficult mechanical problems around the farm. Grain silos store thousands of bushels of wheat or barley, with augers moving grain from bottom to top. Clogs create voids and unstable bridges that can collapse suddenly, and moving grain can engulf a person in seconds. Most farms require lockouts and spotters, but smaller operations often skip these precautions during busy seasons. That afternoon, Derek needed to clear a jammed auger inside the main silo. The blockage had stopped operations for 2 days, delaying shipments to a regional grain distributor. Derek's uncle was traveling, leaving him and Gareth to handle the problem. What Derek didn't know was that Gareth, his 36-year-old cousin, had recently discovered Derek had been sleeping with his wife. The betrayal had been eating at Gareth for weeks, transforming years of camaraderie into bitter resentment. Derek climbed the external ladder and entered through the top hatch, without a safety harness or fall arrest, descending into the grain-filled chamber. Gareth remained outside, supposedly monitoring the auger controls. Standard procedure required the auger's power to be completely disconnected during internal work, with multiple safety locks engaged. Gareth had told Derek everything was secure, but he had deliberately bypassed the emergency disengage mechanism, leaving the system vulnerable to accidental or intentional activation. At approximately 3:15 in the afternoon, Derek reached the blockage point 15 feet below the grain surface. He radioed Gareth that he'd located the jam and was working to clear it. The radio's reply came through as static. Inside the steel shell, reception was poor. Moments later, without warning or explanation, the auger roared to life. The mechanical screw began churning violently, creating immediate and catastrophic grain movement. Derek shouted into his radio as thousands of pounds of wheat shifted around him, the grain flowing like liquid toward the auger's intake. The suction pulled him sideways into the steel wall with crushing force. His torso compressed against the silo's interior as grain continued flowing, pinning him completely. A farmhand working near the equipment shed heard Derek's muffled screams and ran to the silo base. He peered through the 6-inch inspection port and could see grain packed tightly against the silo wall, with no movement where Derek had been working moments earlier. The witness immediately shut down the main power and called emergency services, but the grain's pressure made extraction impossible without specialized equipment. Rescue teams spent 3 hours carefully removing grain to access Derek's body. He had suffocated within minutes of entrapment, unable to expand his chest against the compressed wheat. The autopsy revealed the official cause of death as compression asphyxia with associated crush injuries caused by grain entrapment. Provincial investigators sealed the silo and found the safety switches had been deliberately tampered that morning. Forensic testing confirmed the modifications were recent, and surveillance showed Gareth repeatedly near the control panel before the accident. He was arrested and charged with second-degree murder and criminal negligence causing death. He was later convicted of second-degree murder and sentenced to life imprisonment under Canadian law, with parole eligibility set decades into the future. It was August 14, 2017. The Shenzhen construction site stood 43 stories tall against the humid morning sky in China. Liang Wei, a 36-year-old senior foreman for a major Chinese construction firm, arrived at 6:30 in the morning to begin his daily inspection routine, unaware that a bundle of steel beams would end his life before lunch. Liang had spent 14 years working his way up from general laborer to senior foreman, earning respect for his meticulous attention to safety protocols. He carried a weathered inspection notebook everywhere, documenting rigging errors, load calculations, and equipment defects that others overlooked. His technical expertise in crane operations and load mechanics made him valuable, but also created friction with supervisors who prioritized speed over safety. Construction crane work involves coordinating massive suspended loads using steel cables and rigging systems, where a single failed connection point can send tons of material plummeting to the ground below, requiring constant vigilance and adherence to load capacity limits and mandatory rigging inspections that were often violated under deadline pressure. 3 weeks earlier, Liang had filed a formal complaint against Supervisor Chen Rong, 40, after discovering falsified rigging inspection reports on Chen's crew. The complaint triggered an internal investigation that threatened Chen's position. Co-workers later recalled increasing hostility between the two men, including a heated argument in the site office 2 days before the accident, where Chen accused Liang of sabotaging his career. That Monday morning, Chen authorized movement of a load, a 6-ton bundle of steel I-beams, along the North Corridor. Fully aware, Liang conducted his daily inspections along that exact path between 11 o'clock in the morning and noon, and deliberately scheduling the lift during that window. The rigging pins required regular visual inspections. Chen's crew had not performed the mandated checks in over a week, and a fatigue crack had developed inside one of the rigging pins, not visible during routine visual checks, and only exposed once the load was placed under full tension. Liang began his inspection route that morning, moving methodically through the construction zone with his notebook. Site rules forbade workers from passing beneath suspended lifts, but that corridor had been left open that morning to speed traffic. Multiple workers saw him walking the North Corridor, checking welding points and measuring clearances. Minutes later, Chen ordered his crane operator to reposition the steel bundle along the same corridor, creating a narrow window, where Liang would pass directly beneath the suspended load. The operator radioed for confirmation, specifically noting workers were still using the corridor, and was told to proceed by Chen. At 11:38 in the morning, the compromised rigging pin failed catastrophically. The 6-ton steel bundle detached from its mounting points, swinging violently off-center before dropping straight down. A fixed high-mast CCTV camera overlooking the North Corridor recorded the load's swing and the moment of detachment. Witness statements and the inspection notebook filled in the rest of the timeline. CCTV footage and witness statements later indicated Liang reacted to the sound of snapping metal moments before impact. The steel bundle struck him directly in the chest with the full force of gravity, crushing him instantly against the concrete floor. The impact was devastating. Workers 20 feet away saw Liang's body crumple beneath the load, blood spreading rapidly across the concrete. Site medics reached him within minutes. Municipal responders followed shortly after, but Liang showed no vital signs. The medical examiner determined death was instantaneous from polytrauma caused by high-impact crushing injury. The construction site was immediately shut down by municipal authorities. Chen claimed equipment failure during questioning, but investigators recovered CCTV footage showing the timeline. Chen was later convicted of intentional homicide under Chinese criminal law and sentenced to life imprisonment, with the court citing retaliatory motive, safety violations, and deliberate scheduling of the lift as key factors. It was January 16, 2014. The morning air in Patna, India, was thick. Breakfast preparation was underway in the kitchen of a small private boarding school, steam rising from aluminum pots as rice and lentils cooked for fewer than 60 resident students. Ramesh Singh, a 45-year-old cook who had worked in the school's kitchen for 8 years, wasn't supposed to be there that morning. He'd been terminated 3 weeks earlier after repeated complaints about hygiene violations and showing up drunk during meal preparation. The district education officer had finally acted on the headmistress's formal complaint, ending Ramesh's employment without severance. Colleagues said that Ramesh blamed the headmistress entirely for his firing. They said that he'd told them he worked there longer than she had, and the dismissal meant losing his small income and facing shame in his neighborhood. For 3 weeks, he'd watched from across the street as the replacement cook arrived each morning. He knew the kitchen routine perfectly, the unlocked side entrance that had no guard during early morning hours, and the chaos of morning preparation when nobody paid attention to who came and went. That morning, a student noticed Ramesh slipped into the kitchen at approximately 10:45 in the morning, carrying a small bottle containing approximately 30 milliliters of concentrated organophosphate pesticide, telling the clerk he needed it for crop treatment. The current cook had stepped outside to receive the vegetable delivery. Ramesh moved quickly to the nearly finished dal pot, pouring the entire bottle into the simmering lentils, stirring thoroughly so it dissolved completely and left no visible trace. He was gone within 90 seconds. By late morning, the dining hall filled with younger boarding students who ate their meals together under staff supervision. Teachers distributed steel plates as the dal was ladled over rice. The children, most from families surviving on less than 100 rupees daily, ate eagerly. Within 8 minutes, a 7-year-old girl began vomiting violently, then another child, then 5 more simultaneously. The cafeteria erupted into chaos. Children clutched their stomachs, sweating profusely despite the cool weather, their pupils constricted to pinpoints. Several collapsed face first into their plates. Teachers screamed for help, trying to carry convulsing students toward the gate. But 3 teachers also began showing symptoms after tasting the food during service. Parents waiting outside rushed in, finding children unconscious and struggling to breathe. A teacher managed to call emergency services at 12:14 in the afternoon. The nearest hospital was approximately 7 miles away. Private vehicles began evacuating children immediately, but traffic and deteriorating conditions made transport agonizing. 21 students and 3 staff members were transported to nearby hospitals, overwhelming emergency departments unprepared for mass casualty poisoning. 4 children, aged 6 to 9, died within hours from acute respiratory failure, complicated by secondary hypoxic organ injury. The post-mortem examinations revealed severe neurotoxicity, pulmonary edema, and secondary hypoxic damage to multiple organs, consistent with acute organophosphate poisoning. Their small bodies had absorbed lethal concentrations of the pesticide through ingestion, causing their nervous systems to fail, while breathing became impossible. The school's CCTV footage showed Ramesh entering the side entrance with time-stamped grainy images that captured his movement, but not the exact stirring of the dal pot. So investigators still relied on the discarded bottle and vendor receipt to confirm the act. Investigators found the plastic pesticide bottle with a partially legible label, discarded 2 blocks away with his fingerprints partially intact. Ramesh was arrested later that evening. He was later convicted on multiple counts of murder and attempted murder and sentenced to life imprisonment, with the court citing deliberate retaliation and the vulnerability of the victims as aggravating factors. It was June 18, 2013. The municipal police headquarters in La Paz, Bolivia, sat under cloudless skies, its basement evidence rooms holding more than just confiscated property. Inside one of these windowless concrete spaces, used as an off-the-books overflow locker, a 26-year-old citizen rights activist named Carlos Rojas was about to begin a slow death that would expose systemic abuse within the city's detention system. Carlos had spent 3 years working with a grassroots transparency organization, documenting cases of police corruption and extortion in La Paz's working-class neighborhoods. He wasn't a lawyer or journalist, just a community organizer with a notebook and stubborn conviction. His recent report had detailed specific instances of officers demanding bribes from street vendors and unlawfully detaining citizens for fabricated offenses. Carlos had mastered this methodical approach, building cases that had previously led to 2 officer suspensions. On June 18th, Officer Eduardo Morales, a 41-year-old police sergeant named in Carlos's latest report, arrested him on fabricated drug possession charges. Morales had a documented history of detainee abuse, including 3 prior complaints that had been administratively dismissed. Instead of processing Carlos through normal booking procedures where his detention would be logged and monitored, Morales took him directly to the basement overflow room. The space was approximately 8 by 10 feet, concrete walls, no windows, with a single overhead bulb and a locked steel door. Morales had repeatedly tampered with the evidence ledger and the quartermaster's key logs. Morales told other officers Carlos was being held pending investigation, but never entered him into the official detention log. No food or water was provided. The room had no toilet or sink. June temperatures in La Paz reached 65 degrees Fahrenheit during day, but the basement remained cold at night. Carlos's family reported him missing within 24 hours, but police claimed they had no record of his whereabouts. Within 48 hours of his detention, Carlos began showing marked dehydration symptoms, including intense thirst, dizziness, headache, decreased urine output, and confusion. His lips cracked, and his eyes had sunken deeply. Medical examiners later noted that the human body typically survives 3 to 5 days without water, depending on conditions, physical health, and ambient temperature. They concluded the cold basement environment accelerated Carlos's decline toward the lower end of that window. By the 3rd day of his detention, Carlos could no longer stand. His kidneys were failing, his blood pressure dropping dangerously low. Officers saw him lay on the concrete floor, semi-conscious, with his skin dry and parchment-like, mucous membranes shriveled, and saliva crusted at the corners of his mouth. They said that he tried licking the floor and using his shirt to collect moisture. On June 22nd, 4 days after his detention began, a junior officer discovered him during a scheduled routine evidence audit. Carlos was unresponsive, his body positioned near the door where he had apparently tried to call for help. The officer immediately radioed for emergency medical assistance. Paramedics arrived within 12 minutes and pronounced death at the scene after assessment. The autopsy listed acute dehydration and hypovolemic shock as the cause of death, noting hemoconcentration, high serum sodium, and acute kidney damage. Investigators later discovered the basement corridor camera had a 2-day gap logged as maintenance, and the evidence ledger contained several post-dated entries. Morales had exclusive access to the overflow locker that witnesses later described, seeing him use alone. Officer Morales was arrested and charged with involuntary manslaughter and human rights violations. He was later convicted and sentenced to a lengthy prison term, with the court citing deliberate unlawful detention, deprivation of basic care, and retaliatory motive. Several senior officers were suspended and later dismissed following the investigation. It was February 12, 2018. The winter air in Helsinki, Finland was typical for the season, hovering around 15 degrees Fahrenheit. Inside a downtown fitness center, Mikko Laine, a 33-year-old gym supervisor, arrived for his evening shift unaware that a workplace conflict he'd dismissed would escalate into his final hours. Mikko had worked in fitness management for 9 years, climbing from personal trainer to supervisor at one of Helsinki's mid-tier gym chains. He was known for his rigid management style and zero-tolerance approach to maintenance violations. Friends described him as efficient but abrasive, someone who prioritized protocols over people. His personnel file showed multiple complaints about his confrontational methods, particularly toward junior staff. 2 weeks earlier, he'd formally reprimanded Jari Koskinen, a 28-year-old maintenance worker, for leaving cleaning supplies unsecured, threatening termination for future violations. Co-workers later told investigators that Jari became openly resentful afterward, repeatedly stating Mikko had ruined his job and would pay for it. The reprimand was logged in the facility's internal incident system and acknowledged electronically by Jari. The Finnish sauna ran between 160 and 180 degrees Fahrenheit, controlled by decade-old electric heaters with a manual panel in the maintenance corridor. Staff were required to monitor use and ventilation, but records showed the high-temperature cutoff had been flagged as unreliable that month. The wooden door had been improperly fitted with a non-standard maintenance restraint, a temporary service bar not intended for occupied use, creating a severe safety hazard if misused. That evening, Hari approached Miko at 6:45 in the afternoon, claiming the sauna needed immediate deep cleaning before peak hours. Miko agreed to inspect the space first, entering the 8-by-10-foot chamber while Jari gathered supplies. The ventilation vent inside the sauna had been partially blocked due to ongoing cleaning preparations, reducing airflow. The facility's incident report later confirmed that Jari deliberately locked the door's exterior bolt once Miko was inside, then remained briefly in the maintenance corridor, adjusting the heater controls before leaving the area entirely, despite knowing the sauna was occupied. Miko initially didn't notice the locked door, assuming Hari would return momentarily. By 7:05 in the afternoon, the temperature had climbed past 190 degrees Fahrenheit, well beyond safe operating levels. Witness timelines later suggested Miko attempted to exit multiple times as the heat intensified, discovering the door wouldn't budge. He pounded on the thick wooden door, but the sauna's dense wood construction and continuous ambient noise from the gym's sound system masked any noise. The facility's CCTV footage, installed only in public hallways under company privacy policy, captured Miko's hand briefly appearing in the door's small window before disappearing. At approximately 7:20 in the afternoon, Miko collapsed forward onto the wooden bench. The extreme heat had caused severe dehydration and disorientation within minutes, his core body temperature rising rapidly. His body temperature reached critical levels, triggering organ stress and cardiac irregularities. The compromised ventilation and sustained heater output prevented meaningful cooling, accelerating his physical deterioration. He remained motionless on the bench as the temperature stabilized around 195 degrees Fahrenheit due to the heater continuing to cycle without an effective cutoff. A gym member attempting to use the sauna at 8:30 in the afternoon noticed the locked door and unusual heat radiating through the wood. After failing to open it, she alerted the front desk staff. Front desk logs later confirmed no scheduled maintenance was authorized at that hour. Employees forced the door open at 8:42 in the afternoon, discovering Miko unconscious and unresponsive. Emergency services arrived within 9 minutes, but paramedics pronounced him dead at the scene. The autopsy determined Miko died from fatal hyperthermia, complicated by severe dehydration, cardiovascular collapse, and heat stroke-induced heart arrhythmia. The CCTV footage became crucial evidence, showing Hari locking the door and being present near the heater control area shortly before the temperature spike, with timestamps matching maintenance logs and front desk records. Digital footage metadata was preserved by investigators to maintain chain of custody. Police arrested him 4 days later on homicide charges. He was later convicted and sentenced to life imprisonment, with the court citing deliberate confinement, manipulation of the sauna's safety systems, and retaliatory motive. Thanks for watching. If you liked these stories, click here.